Welcome to Nightshift Horror. Before we check in tonight, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now get comfortable. The night shift is about to begin.
Story 1. Sublevel B was still powered. I stood in the breaker room at 11:47 p.m. when the panel confirmed what I'd been denying for 3 weeks. Sublevel B, officially decommissioned since 2016, sealed with authorization codes I'd personally archived, was drawing 1,200 watts consistently. The load curve was perfect. Too perfect. It matched the consumption pattern of active occupancy. Fluorescent lighting, cycling on motion detection, HVAC maintaining 72 degrees. Even the backup battery chargers showing regular discharge and recharge intervals. I contacted dispatch to report a monitoring error, but before I could finish explaining, my own voice came through on the recorded access log, authorizing entry to sublevel B at 0114. It was currently 11:49 p.m. I hadn't gone down there. Not yet. My name is Daniel Worth. I've worked facilities maintenance at Riverside General Hospital for 11 years. I started as a general technician, moved through HVAC certification, and eventually took the night supervisor position in 2019. The role suited me. I preferred the quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. when the hospital transitioned from the chaos of day operations to the mechanical rhythms of overnight care. Most of my shift involved monitoring building systems from a central control room on the ground floor. Electrical distribution, climate control, water pressure, emergency backup generators, elevator diagnostics, and security camera feeds. The hospital itself dated back to 1963, though it had undergone 4 major expansions. The original structure included 3 basement levels. B1 housed laundry services and general storage. B2 contained the boiler room and mechanical systems, and B3, sublevel B, as the original blueprints labeled it, had served as expanded storage and administrative archives before being decommissioned. The official closure happened after a minor flooding incident revealed structural concerns with the foundation. Rather than renovate, the hospital administration simply relocated everything, sealed the access doors, and rerouted the electrical and HVAC systems. By the time I arrived, sublevel B was already a bureaucratic ghost. Technically part of the building, functionally abandoned. I'd been down there exactly once during my first month when a senior technician named Frank Holloway gave me the full tour. He'd worked at Riverside for 27 years and knew every pipe, conduit, and access panel in the building. Sublevel B had felt exactly like what it was, a forgotten space with peeling paint, dust-covered floors, and the particular silence of a place no longer needed. Frank showed me the main breaker panel, locked in the off position with a municipal tag confirming decommissioning. He explained that the space no longer received power, climate control, or water. The access door at the bottom of the B2 stairwell had been secured with a keypad lock set to a 16-digit override code known only to facilities directors and senior maintenance supervisors. Frank retired in 2020. I inherited his key codes and his meticulous maintenance logs. The anomaly began 3 weeks ago on October 19th. I was reviewing the nightly electrical distribution report, a routine task I performed every shift to identify irregularities or inefficiencies. The report flagged an unexpected load on Grid 7, which historically served sublevel B. I assumed it was a reporting error. Decommissioned circuits sometimes generated phantom readings due to residual current or faulty sensors. I made a note to schedule a diagnostic check and moved on. The following night, the same load appeared, 1,200 watts, consistent, no fluctuation. I pulled the archived schematics and confirmed that Grid 7 had been physically disconnected from Sublevel B in 2016. The breaker was tagged and locked. There should have been no load at all, not even a phantom reading. On October 21st, I accessed the hospital's building management system and ran a diagnostic on every sensor tied to Grid 7. All returned normal. The system interpreted the load as legitimate. I cross-referenced it with HVAC data and discovered that the climate control system was maintaining temperature and airflow in Sublevel B, despite the fact that the vents had been sealed and the air handlers rerouted. I should have reported it immediately. Instead, I told myself it was a software glitch, some legacy code still polling a space that no longer existed in the physical system. I manually flagged the data as erroneous and submitted a work order for a full electrical audit. On October 23rd, I noticed the access log. Riverside General tracked every keypad entry in the building. It was a security measure implemented after a medication theft in 2018. The system logged the door, the time, the badge or code used, and the identity of the person entering. I reviewed the access logs as part of my nightly checklist, scanning for unauthorized entries or pattern anomalies. The entry appeared at 01:14 a.m., Sublevel B access door, authorization, D. Worth, code accepted. I stared at the screen. I had been in the control room at 01:14 a.m., reviewing camera feeds from the second-floor surgical wing. I hadn't left my desk. I checked my badge. It was still clipped to my belt. I checked the override code list. My code was the only one active for Sublevel B. No one else had clearance. I replayed the security camera feed for the B2 stairwell. At 01:12 a.m., the stairwell was empty. At 01:14 a.m., the timestamp on the access door blinked green, indicating accepted authorization. The door remained closed. No one entered or exited. The camera showed no movement. But the log insisted I had gone down. I called the security desk and asked if they'd noticed anything unusual. The overnight guard, a man named Tim Brennan, checked his own monitors and confirmed no alerts, no unauthorized access, no anomalies. He suggested the system might be logging a maintenance override, something automated. I thanked him and ended the call, but I didn't believe him. The next entry appeared on October 25th, same time, same authorization, same empty stairwell. On October 27th, I accessed the archived blueprints for Sublevel B and cross-referenced them with the building management system. According to the system, Sublevel B was climate-controlled, adequately lit, and compliant with fire safety regulations. According to reality, it had been sealed for 8 years. I stood outside the access door on the night of October 28th. It was 00:45 a.m. The stairwell to B2 was lit by a single fluorescent panel that hummed faintly, casting the kind of flat institutional light that made every surface look the same. The access door was steel, painted industrial gray, with a keypad lock and a small placard reading, Sublevel B, authorized personnel only. I entered my code. The panel blinked green, the lock disengaged with a mechanical click. I didn't open the door. Instead, I returned to the control room and pulled up every piece of data I could find on Sublevel B. Electrical load, consistent. HVAC, airflow, normal. Access log, entry authorized at 01:14 a.m., October 29th, 6 hours in the future. I checked the timestamp. It was October 28th, 00:52 a.m. The log was updating in advance. I reviewed the security camera feeds. Riverside General had over 200 cameras, but only 4 monitored the basement levels. Camera B2A covered the boiler room. Camera B2B covered the main corridor. Camera B2C covered the laundry intake area. camera B2D covered the stairwell leading to sublevel B. I rewound camera B2D to 01:14 a.m. on October 23rd. The feed showed the stairwell empty. The access door remained closed. No one approached. At 01:14 a.m., the indicator light on the keypad blinked green. The door did not open. I advanced the feed to October 25th. Same result. Green light. No movement. I checked the current feed. It was 01:03 a.m. I watched the stairwell in real time. At 01:14 a.m., the keypad blinked green. The lock disengaged. The door remained closed. I was watching it happen. I descended to B2 at 01:27 a.m. The stairwell was empty just as the camera had shown. I stood in front of the access door and examined the keypad. It was a standard model, the same used throughout the hospital. No signs of tampering. No diagnostic alerts. I placed my hand on the door. It was cool to the touch. I didn't open it. Instead, I returned to the control room and accessed the building management system's maintenance logs. Every system in the hospital generated automated logs documenting routine checks, repairs, and anomalies. I searched for entries related to sublevel B. The logs showed regular maintenance, weekly inspections, monthly systems checks, quarterly safety audits, all dated within the past 3 weeks. All signed with my credentials. I read through the entries. They were detailed, professional, and thorough. They described the condition of the lighting, the HVAC performance, the structural integrity of the space. They noted minor issues: a flickering bulb in the northwest corner, a slight pressure drop in the ventilation system, and documented corrective actions taken. I hadn't written any of them. I checked the timestamps. The inspections had been logged during my shifts while I was in the control room. I reviewed the camera feeds for those dates and times. I never left my desk. On November 1st, I contacted the Building Management System's technical support line. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. Decommissioned space showing active power draw, automated access logs with my credentials, maintenance reports I didn't write. The support technician walked me through a series of diagnostic steps. We verified that my credentials hadn't been cloned or compromised. We confirmed that no remote access had been granted to the system. We reviewed the sensor calibrations. Everything returned normal. The technician suggested that the system might be operating on cached data, some kind of legacy loop that hadn't been properly cleared during decommissioning. He recommended a full system reset and a physical inspection of sublevel B to confirm its status. I scheduled the reset for November 4th. On November 2nd, I reviewed the electrical load data again. 1,200 watts, consistent. I pulled up the hospital's historical energy consumption reports and compared the current sublevel B load to the archived data from before decommissioning. The pattern matched. The space was consuming power exactly as it had when it was operational. Lighting on motion detection, HVAC maintaining 72 degrees, equipment in standby mode. I checked the motion detection logs. The system recorded movement in sublevel B every night between 0100 and 0300 hours. The movement patterns were consistent with a human presence. Walking pace, deliberate routes, pauses at specific locations. I pulled up the archived floor plan. The motion detection sensors were positioned in the main corridor, the storage rooms, and the administrative office. The logs showed activation in sequence, as if someone were conducting a systematic inspection. I opened the HVAC data. The airflow readings indicated regular occupancy. The system was compensating for body heat, maintaining temperature stability despite a heat source that shouldn't exist. On November 3rd, I watched camera B2D from 00:30 a.m. to 03:30 a.m. At 01:14 a.m., the keypad blinked green. The door remained closed. I zoomed in on the keypad. The indicator light was steady, not blinking. The lock had disengaged. Someone, or something, had authorization. I switched to the thermal overlay. Riverside General's security system included thermal imaging for specific high-security areas, though the basement cameras weren't typically monitored that way. I activated the thermal feed for camera B2D. At 01:14 a.m., a heat signature appeared on the other side of the access door. Human-shaped, moving. It paused in front of the door as if checking the lock, then moved down the corridor out of frame. I watched the corridor camera B2B. The thermal feed showed nothing. The visible light feed showed nothing. But the motion detection log confirmed activation at 01:15 a.m. I returned to the control room and accessed the full building management system interface. I disabled the automated logging for sub-level B. I removed my credentials from the access authorization list. I manually locked out Grid 7, cutting power to any remaining circuits tied to the decommissioned space. At 01:14 a.m. on November 4th, the access log updated sub-level B access door, authorization D, worth, code accepted. The electrical load remained at 1,200 watts. The HVAC system continued maintaining 72 degrees. The motion detection sensors recorded movement. I stood in the breaker room and stared at the panel. Grid 7 was physically disconnected. The breaker was locked in the off position. The municipal tag confirmed decommissioning, but the load remained. I descended to B2 at 01:43 a.m. The access door was closed. The keypad was dark. I entered my code, the code I'd deleted from the system, and the panel blinked green. The lock disengaged. I opened the door. The stairwell descended into darkness. The lights should have been off. The power should have been disconnected. But I could see a faint glow at the bottom of the stairs, the pale fluorescent wash of active lighting. I descended slowly, one hand on the railing. The air was cool and still with the faint metallic scent of old concrete and dust. The stairs ended at a corridor. The lights were on. Fluorescent panels mounted in the ceiling, humming faintly, casting flat institutional light across peeling paint and dusty floors. The corridor was empty. I walked forward. The motion detection sensor above me blinked red, acknowledging my presence. I passed storage rooms with open doors. The shelves inside were bare, exactly as they'd been when I'd toured the space 11 years ago with Frank Holloway. I reached the administrative office. The door was propped open. Inside, a desk sat against the far wall, its surface covered in a thin layer of dust. A clipboard rested on the desk. I picked it up. It was a maintenance inspection form, dated November 4th, 2024. My name was printed at the top. My signature was at the bottom. The form documented a routine inspection. Lighting functional, HVAC stable, no structural concerns. The handwriting was mine. I set the clipboard down and left the office. I walked back down the corridor, past the storage rooms, past the motion detection sensors that tracked my movement. I reached the stairwell and climbed back to B2. The access door closed behind me. The lock engaged. The keypad went dark. I returned to the control room and pulled up the camera B2D feed. I rewound to 01:43 a.m. The feed showed the stairwell. Empty. The access door remained closed. No one entered or exited. I checked the motion detection log. It recorded activation in sub-level B at 01:45 a.m. I checked the thermal imaging. It showed a heat signature moving through the corridor, pausing at the administrative office, then returning to the stairwell. I checked the access log. It listed 2 entries for November 4th. One at 01:14 a.m., one at 01:43 a.m., both authorized by D. Worth. I submitted my final report to the facilities director on November 6th. I documented the electrical anomaly, the access log discrepancies, the automated maintenance reports, and my physical inspection. I recommended a full audit of the building management system and a structural evaluation of sublevel B. The facilities director responded within 48 hours. He thanked me for the thorough report and confirmed that a system audit had been scheduled. He noted that the building management system had been flagging sublevel B as operational due to an uncorrected software error dating back to the decommissioning. He assured me that the issue would be resolved and that the electrical load readings were artifacts of faulty sensors. I accepted his explanation because I wanted to believe it. But I still monitor Grid 7 every night. The load remains consistent, 1,200 watts. The access log continues to update. The maintenance reports continue to generate. And every night at 01:14 a.m., the keypad on the sublevel B access door blinks green, authorizing entry for someone who follows procedure with absolute precision. I know what the system says. I know what the cameras show. But I also know what I found on that clipboard, written in my own handwriting, dated for a future inspection I haven't performed yet. Some spaces never stop being operational, even after everyone agrees they're closed. The systems remember. They log every entry, document every check, and maintain the environment for work that continues whether or not anyone believes it's happening. Story 2. The elevator that didn't stop. The diagnostic panel read normal when the elevator descended past basement level 3 and kept going. I stood in the service car with my tablet open, watching the floor indicator blank out while the motion remained smooth, controlled, perfectly calibrated. The descent lasted 47 seconds. When the doors opened, the maintenance panel listed the destination as Operational Core. I checked the hospital blueprints on my tablet. There was no operational core. Basement level 3 was the lowest floor in the building, but the elevator had delivered me somewhere, and the panel suggested I'd requested it. The timestamp on the diagnostic log showed I'd initiated the descent at 02:41 a.m. It was currently 02:38 a.m. My name is Ellen Marsh. I've been an elevator maintenance technician for 9 years, the last 4 spent under contract with Riverside General Hospital. My job involves routine inspections, emergency repairs, and compliance testing for the hospital's 11 passenger elevators and 3 service elevators. Most of my work happens during the day, but the hospital schedules deep diagnostics and mechanical testing for overnight hours to avoid disrupting patient transport. Riverside General's elevator system was installed in 2008 during a major infrastructure upgrade. The passenger elevators served floors 1 through 7 and basement levels 1 and 2. The service elevators, larger cars used for equipment, supplies, and medical waste, extended to basement level 3, which housed the primary mechanical systems. The entire system was networked through a centralized control panel in the basement machine room, monitored by software that tracked every trip, every door cycle, every mechanical variance. I performed my monthly inspection on November 9th. The work order specified elevator S2, the southernmost service elevator. The inspection checklist included cable tension, brake function, door alignment, and control system diagnostics. I began at 8:30 p.m. after the evening meal service, when traffic was lightest. Elevator S2 ran smoothly. I tested it from every floor, checked the emergency stop, verified the intercom, and reviewed the diagnostic logs. Everything returned normal. I completed the inspection at 10:15 p.m. and submitted my report to the hospital's facilities coordinator. The anomaly appeared 3 days later. On November 12th, I received a maintenance alert at 01:23 a.m. Elevator S2 had triggered a diagnostic flag, unscheduled descent to basement level 3. The alert didn't indicate a malfunction, just an irregularity. a trip that hadn't been requested through the normal call system. I reviewed the logs remotely from my apartment. The elevator had descended from the ground floor at 01:18 a.m., stopped at basement level 3 for 90 seconds, then returned to the ground floor. No one had entered or exited. The doors had opened and closed on their own. I flagged it as a sensor error and made a note to inspect the call buttons on my next visit. On November 14th, the same alert appeared. 01:18 a.m. Unscheduled descent to basement level 3. 90-second stop. No entry or exit. I pulled up the security camera feed for the elevator interior. The camera showed an empty car. The doors opened at basement level 3, revealing an empty corridor. The doors closed. The car returned to the ground floor. I contacted the hospital's facilities coordinator and requested access to the basement machine room to inspect the control panel. He approved the request and scheduled me for November 16th. On November 15th, I received another alert, 01:18 a.m. But this time, the diagnostic log included additional data. The elevator had descended past basement level 3. The floor indicator had registered an additional level. No label, just a downward arrow. The descent had lasted 47 seconds before the elevator returned to its normal route. I reviewed the blueprints. Riverside General had 3 basement levels. There was no 4th level. The elevator shaft terminated at basement level 3. I checked the historical maintenance records. No modifications, no extensions. The shaft ended where it was supposed to end. I called the facilities coordinator and explained the situation. He suggested a software glitch, possibly a corrupted log entry. He asked if the elevator was still operational. I confirmed that it was. He told me to proceed with the scheduled inspection and to run a full diagnostic on the control system. I arrived at Riverside General at 11 p.m. on November 16th. The hospital at night had a specific quality, quiet but not silent, with the low hum of ventilation systems and the distant chime of call bells. I took the staff stairwell down to basement level 3. The machine room was at the end of a long corridor lined with exposed pipes and conduit. The room itself was a windowless space filled with the mechanical guts of the elevator system. Motors, pulleys, cables, and the central control panel. I powered up the diagnostic interface and ran a full system check. Cable tension, normal. Brake function, normal. Door sensors, normal. Control logic, normal. I reviewed the trip logs. Elevator S2 had made its usual rounds. Laundry, supply transport, maintenance access. Nothing unusual except the unscheduled descents at 01:18 a.m. I isolated the control program for elevator S2 and examined the floor registry. The system listed 3 basement levels, no additional floors, no operational core, no downward arrow. I checked the physical limit switches, mechanical safeties that prevented the elevator from traveling beyond its intended range. The switches were intact and properly calibrated. I was preparing to leave when the diagnostic panel flagged an active trip. Elevator S2 was descending. I checked the call log. No request had been registered. I watched the floor indicator on the panel. Ground floor, basement level 1, basement level 2, basement level 3. The elevator stopped. The panel showed the doors opening. I waited. After 90 seconds, the doors closed. The elevator returned to the ground floor. I left the machine room and walked to the elevator lobby on basement level 3. Elevator S2 sat idle, doors closed. I pressed the call button. The doors opened immediately. The interior was empty. I stepped inside and examined the control panel. Standard layout, numbered buttons for each floor, an emergency stop, an alarm, and intercom. I pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed. The elevator ascended smoothly. I repeated the process 3 times, testing every floor. The elevator performed perfectly. On November 18th, I installed a secondary diagnostic monitor inside elevator S2. The device recorded real-time data directly from the car's internal systems, independent of the centralized control panel. If the elevator descended past basement level 3, the monitor would capture it. On November 19th at 01:18 a.m., I received an alert. Elevator S2 was descending past basement level 3. I accessed the secondary monitor remotely. The data stream showed continuous motion. The floor indicator read basement level 3. Then it went blank. The descent continued. I watched the elapsed time. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 47 seconds. The motion stopped. The doors opened. The monitor recorded the stop as operational core. I checked the hospital blueprints again. No operational core. I searched the building management system for any reference to the term. Nothing. I called the facilities coordinator and left a message explaining the situation. He returned my call at 8 a.m. and asked if I could demonstrate the issue in person. I agreed to meet him on November 20th at 11 p.m. We stood in the elevator lobby on basement level 3 at 11:45 p.m. I explained the diagnostic data, the unscheduled descents, the operational core designation. The facilities coordinator, a man named Greg Linderman, who'd worked at Riverside for 16 years, listened patiently. He acknowledged the data but pointed out that the elevator was functioning correctly during normal operations. He suggested the monitor might be misinterpreting the data, logging a phantom destination that didn't exist. I proposed a direct test. I would ride elevator S2 during the anomaly window and observe what happened. Greg agreed on the condition that I maintain radio contact and abort if anything seemed unsafe. At 01:15 a.m. on November 21st, I entered elevator S2 on the ground floor. I carried a handheld radio, my tablet with the diagnostic software, and a flashlight. Greg remained in the machine room monitoring the control panel. I pressed the button for basement level 3. The doors closed. The elevator descended smoothly. Ground floor, basement level 1, basement level 2, basement level 3. The doors opened. I stepped out into the corridor, confirmed my location, then stepped back inside. I pressed the ground floor button. The doors closed. The elevator began to ascend, then stopped. The floor indicator blinked. The car reversed direction and began descending. I pressed the emergency stop. Nothing happened. I pressed the ground floor button again. The panel didn't respond. The descent continued. I radioed Greg. Elevator S2 is descending past basement level 3. I did not initiate this. His voice came through clearly. Copy. Panel shows you stopped at basement level 3. Doors opened and closed. Negative. I'm descending. Ellen, the panel shows... The radio went silent. Not static. Silence. I checked my tablet. The diagnostic software showed real-time data. Continuous descent, elapsed time 32 seconds, destination unlisted. The elevator's motion remained smooth, perfectly controlled. No mechanical vibration, no sign of malfunction. At 47 seconds, the car stopped. The floor indicator remained blank. The doors opened. I stepped forward and looked out. The space beyond was not basement level 3. It was a corridor. Concrete floor, white painted walls, fluorescent lighting. The layout was identical to basement level 3, but cleaner, newer. No exposed pipes, no conduit, no dust. The lights were bright and steady. A placard on the wall opposite the elevator read, Operational Core. Authorized maintenance personnel only. I stepped out of the elevator. The air was cool and still with the faint mechanical hum of active HVAC. I turned back. The elevator doors remained open. I checked my radio. Still silent. I checked my phone. No signal. I walked down the corridor. It extended about 50 feet before ending at a T intersection. The walls were bare except for evenly spaced placards listing equipment and system codes. I recognized some of them. Electrical grid designations, HVAC zone identifiers, waterline specifications, but the codes didn't match Riverside General's numbering system. I reached the intersection and looked both ways. To the left, the corridor continued for another 50 feet before turning. To the right, it opened into a larger space that resembled a control room. I chose right. The control room contained a central workstation surrounded by multiple monitors. The monitors displayed live feeds from various building systems. Electrical distribution, climate control, water pressure, emergency backup generators. I recognized the interface. It was identical to the building management system used throughout the hospital. I approached the workstation. The keyboard was clean, no dust. The chair was adjusted to a height that matched my own. The primary monitor displayed a schematic of Riverside General. The building was rendered in a wireframe with color-coded overlays indicating system status. I zoomed in on the basement levels. 3 levels were shown, B1, B2, B3. Below B3, a 4th level was labeled Operational Core. I clicked on Operational Core. The schematic expanded to show a detailed layout. Corridors, rooms, equipment bays, and a central control room. The room I was standing in. According to the schematic, Operational Core occupied the same footprint as the levels above it, directly beneath basement level 3. I checked the system logs. The control room was actively monitoring every system in the hospital in real time. Temperature readings, power consumption, water flow, elevator diagnostics, all current, all accurate. I pulled up the elevator logs. Elevator S2 was listed as stationary at Operational Core. The timestamp read 0241 a.m. I checked my watch. It was 0241 a.m. I navigated back to the main schematic and looked for personnel tracking. Riverside General used badge scanners and keycard access to monitor staff locations. The system showed one active presence in Operational Core, E. Marsh, me. According to the log, I had accessed Operational Core at 0118 a.m., 23 minutes before I actually entered the elevator. I returned to the corridor and walked back to the elevator. The doors were still open. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. The panel lit up. The doors closed. The elevator began to ascend. I counted. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 47 seconds. The car stopped. The doors opened. I was on the ground floor. The lobby was empty. I checked my radio. It crackled to life. Greg's voice came through. "Ellen? I'm here, ground floor. You just returned from basement level 3. Greg, I was down there for 11 minutes. Silence. Then, Ellen, the panel doesn't show any Operational Core. You stopped at basement level 3, doors opened and closed, and you came back up. I retrieved my tablet and reviewed the secondary monitor data. The descent was recorded, 47 seconds, destination Operational Core, stop duration 11 minutes, ascent 47 seconds. The data matched my experience. The control panel in the machine room showed something else. I met Greg in the machine room. He pulled up the trip log and showed me the entry. Elevator S2. Descended to basement level 3 at 0118 a.m. Stopped for 90 seconds, returned to ground floor at 0120 a.m. No additional descent. No Operational Core. I showed him my tablet. He stared at the data, then at me. This doesn't make sense. I asked him if the hospital had ever had a 4th basement level. He said no. He'd worked at Riverside for 16 years, had access to every archived blueprint, and had personally overseen infrastructure projects that required excavation near the foundation. There was no 4th level. I asked if the term Operational Core appeared in any hospital documentation. He searched the building management system. No results. I described what I'd seen. The corridor, the control room, the schematic showing 4 basement levels. Greg listened, then suggested I submit a formal incident report. He promised to escalate the issue to the hospital administration and to request a structural survey of the foundation beneath basement level 3. I submitted my report on November 22nd. I documented the unscheduled descents, the diagnostic data, and my direct experience. I attached screenshots from the secondary monitor and recommended a full system audit. The hospital administration responded on November 25th. They acknowledged my report and confirmed that a system audit had been scheduled. They noted that the elevator had passed all safety inspections and remained operational. They explained that the diagnostic anomalies were likely the result of software errors and that the secondary monitor might be logging corrupted data due to electromagnetic interference in the machine room. I accepted their explanation because it was reasonable. But I kept the secondary monitor installed. On November 27th, elevator S2 descended to operational core again. 0118 a.m., 47-second descent, 90-second stop. The monitor recorded the trip. The control panel showed basement level 3. I didn't ride the elevator that night, but I reviewed the data the next morning. According to the secondary monitor, the elevator had stopped at operational core. According to the building management system, I had accessed operational core at 0118 a.m. and performed routine diagnostics on the HVAC system. The log was signed with my credentials. I hadn't been in the hospital that night. I'd been at home, asleep. On December 1st, I rode elevator S2 during the day. I descended to basement level 3, stepped out, and examined the elevator shaft. The shaft was concrete, enclosed, extending downward into darkness. I used my flashlight to inspect the bottom. The shaft ended at basement level 3, exactly where the blueprints indicated it should end. There was no additional level, no operational core. But every night at 0118 a.m., the elevator descends past the bottom of the shaft and stops at a place that doesn't exist. A place the control panel lists as destination requested, trip authorized, routine maintenance completed. I've stopped trying to reconcile the two realities. The elevator knows where it's going, even if the building doesn't officially contain the destination. And somewhere beneath the hospital, in a control room with clean floors and bright lights, someone is performing the work I'm apparently scheduled to do. Story 3. Steamline pressure anomaly. The gauge fluctuated at 0326 a.m., dropping 2.3 psi in 18 seconds before stabilizing. I stood in the boiler room staring at the readout, waiting for the system to flag a leak or a faulty valve. Instead, the pressure curve smoothed out, compensating for a demand that wasn't logged anywhere in the building. I checked the distribution map on my tablet. Every steam line in the hospital showed normal consumption except line 7, which fed a section of piping decommissioned in 2014. The thermal camera confirmed what I didn't want to see: a human-shaped heat signature moving against the pipes in the unused maintenance tunnel beneath basement level 2. The system marked the load as staff authorized. The timestamp listed the authorization under my name, dated for 0314 a.m. It was currently 0328 a.m. I hadn't authorized anything yet. My name is Robert Gaines. I've worked as a boiler room engineer at Riverside General Hospital for 13 years. My role involves monitoring and maintaining the hospital's steam generation and distribution system, which provides heating, sterilization, and humidification throughout the facility. The work is technical, solitary, and consistent. I prefer it that way. The hospital's steam plant was installed in 2003 as part of a comprehensive mechanical upgrade. The system consisted of 3 primary boilers with a combined output of 12 million BTUs per hour, feeding a network of insulated pipes that ran through utility tunnels beneath the hospital. Most of the distribution system was easily accessible for maintenance, but certain sections, legacy piping from the original 1963 structure, remained in service despite being difficult to reach. One of those sections was Line 7. Line 7 originated in the boiler room, descended through a vertical chase to basement level 2, and continued through a maintenance tunnel that ran parallel to the hospital's eastern wing. The tunnel itself dated back to the original construction and had been partially sealed during the 2003 upgrade. The piping within it remained functional, but was no longer considered part of the primary distribution network. In 2014, following a routine inspection that revealed minor corrosion, the hospital administration decided to isolate Line 7 and reroute steam through redundant lines. The isolation valves were closed, the tunnel access was restricted, and the line was effectively decommissioned. I'd been down there twice, once during my initial training in 2011 and once in 2014 to assist with the isolation procedure. The tunnel was narrow, concrete-walled, with exposed piping running along the ceiling and intermittent lighting that flickered more often than it stayed steady. It smelled of damp concrete and old insulation. The access door was located in a utility corridor off basement level 2, secured with a padlock and marked with a faded maintenance tag. By 2015, Line 7 was functionally forgotten. The anomaly began on December 3rd. I was performing my routine midnight systems check when I noticed a pressure fluctuation on Line 7. The gauge showed a drop of 1.8 psi at 00:43 a.m., followed by a gradual recovery over 90 seconds. I assumed it was a sensor error. Decommissioned lines sometimes generated phantom readings as residual steam cooled and condensed within the pipes. I made a note to recalibrate the sensor during my next scheduled maintenance and moved on. The following night, the same fluctuation appeared. 1.8 psi drop, 90-second recovery, same timeline, 00:43 a.m. On December 5th, I reviewed the historical data. The pressure fluctuations had been occurring nightly since November 18th. 2 weeks of consistent anomalies that I'd somehow missed during my routine checks. The pattern was identical every night. A drop between 1.5 and 2.5 psi, beginning at 00:43 a.m., lasting between 60 and 120 seconds. I cross-referenced the data with the steam distribution logs. Line 7 showed no scheduled usage, no maintenance activity, no authorized access. The line was isolated. The valves were closed. There should have been no pressure fluctuation at all. I checked the isolation valves manually on December 6th. The boiler room contained the primary shutoff for Line 7, a large gate valve with a manual wheel and a lockout tag confirming decommissioned status. I inspected the valve. It was fully closed. I checked the pressure upstream and downstream. Upstream, 85 psi. Downstream, 0 psi. The valve was holding, but the gauge on the monitoring panel still showed pressure fluctuations on Line 7. I tested the gauge. It returned normal. I tested the sensor on the line itself. Normal. I replaced the sensor entirely. The fluctuations continued. On December 8th, I accessed the building management system and reviewed every piece of data tied to Line 7. Pressure, temperature, flow rate, valve status. The system confirmed that Line 7 was isolated and inactive, but the pressure data told a different story. The line was behaving as if it were in use, not continuously but in short, regular intervals consistent with localized demand. I pulled up the thermal imaging data. Riverside General's mechanical systems included thermal cameras positioned throughout the utility tunnels. for monitoring pipe temperature and detecting heat loss. The cameras weren't actively monitored but recorded continuous data that could be reviewed retroactively. I accessed the thermal feed for the basement level 2 maintenance tunnel, the tunnel containing line 7. I rewound to December 3rd, 00:43 a.m. The feed showed the tunnel in grayscale thermal gradient. The pipes glowed faintly, retaining residual heat despite being inactive. At 00:43 a.m., a brighter signature appeared along line 7. The signature moved slowly through the frame, following the line from left to right. It was human-shaped. It paused at a section of piping near the center of the tunnel, then continued moving until it exited the frame. I advanced the feed to December 4th, 00:43 a.m. The same signature appeared, same movement, same pause, same exit. I reviewed every night since November 18th. The signature appeared consistently. Always at 00:43 a.m., always following the same route. I checked the access logs for the maintenance tunnel. The tunnel door was secured with a keycard lock tied to the building management system. The logs showed no entries since 2014. No one had accessed the tunnel in 10 years. I descended to basement level 2 on December 9th at 11 p.m. The utility corridor leading to the maintenance tunnel was narrow and poorly lit, lined with exposed conduit and old signage. The tunnel access door was steel, painted industrial green, with a keycard reader and a maintenance tag dated March 2014. I swiped my keycard. The reader blinked red, access denied. I checked my credentials on the building management system. My keycard had clearance for all mechanical spaces in the hospital, including decommissioned areas. I tried again. Access denied. I returned to the boiler room and contacted the facilities coordinator, Greg Linderman. I explained the situation: pressure fluctuations on a decommissioned line, thermal signatures suggesting human presence, access denied to the tunnel. Greg reviewed my credentials remotely and confirmed that my clearance was active. He suggested the card reader might be malfunctioning and authorized a manual override using a physical key. I retrieved the override key from the facilities office and returned to the tunnel door on December 10th. The key turned smoothly. The lock disengaged. I opened the door. The tunnel extended into darkness, lit by a single functioning overhead bulb about 30 feet in. The air was cool and damp with the faint metallic scent of old piping. I stepped inside and switched on my flashlight. The beam revealed concrete walls, exposed pipes running along the ceiling, and a narrow walkway flanked by vertical conduit. The tunnel was exactly as I remembered it, neglected but structurally sound. I walked forward following line 7. The pipe ran along the right side of the ceiling, insulated with deteriorating fiberglass wrapping. I reached the midpoint of the tunnel and stopped. The thermal camera was mounted on the wall to my left, its lens aimed down the length of the tunnel. I examined the piping at the spot where the thermal signature had paused. The insulation was intact, no signs of damage or leakage, no evidence of recent activity. I continued to the far end of the tunnel. The space terminated at a sealed bulkhead door marked "No Access." Structural restricted area. The door had been welded shut. I checked the piping near the door. Line 7 extended through the wall into the restricted area. According to the blueprints, the line continued for another 40 feet before terminating at a capped end. I returned to the boiler room and reviewed the thermal feed again. On December 10th at 00:43 a.m., 6 hours in the future, the thermal signature appeared in the tunnel. It followed the same route, paused at the same location, and exited the frame. I set an alarm for 00:30 a.m. on December 11th. When it sounded, I descended to basement level 2 and positioned myself outside the maintenance tunnel door. I held my flashlight and waited. At 00:43 a.m., the pressure gauge on my tablet showed the familiar drop, 2.1 psi. I opened the tunnel door and shone my flashlight down the length of the space. The tunnel was empty. The single overhead bulb cast a weak circle of light. I stepped inside and walked to the midpoint. The thermal camera on the wall recorded silently. I stood in the exact spot where the thermal signature always paused. The air felt no different. The pipes hummed faintly with residual heat, but the line was cold to the touch. I returned to the boiler room and pulled up the thermal feed. I rewound to 00:43 a.m. The feed showed the tunnel in thermal gradient. At 00:43 a.m., the heat signature appeared. It moved down the tunnel, paused at the midpoint where I had been standing, and continued to the far end before exiting the frame. I was in the feed, but the signature wasn't me. It was someone else occupying the same space at the same time, visible only to the thermal camera. On December 12th, I reviewed the building management system's maintenance logs. The logs showed a scheduled inspection of Line 7 on December 3rd at 00:43 a.m. The inspection was documented as routine: pressure check, visual inspection of insulation, confirmation of valve status. The inspector's credentials were listed as R. Gaines. My credentials: I hadn't performed any inspection on December 3rd. I checked the other dates. Every night since November 18th, the logs documented an inspection of Line 7 at 00:43 a.m., all signed with my credentials, all marked as completed. I contacted Greg Linderman and requested a meeting. We met in the facilities office on December 13th at 9 a.m. I presented the data, the pressure fluctuations, the thermal signatures, the automated maintenance logs I hadn't written. Greg reviewed everything carefully. He acknowledged the anomalies but pointed out that the system was reporting the inspections as completed successfully. He suggested that the building management system might be auto-generating logs based on legacy scheduled maintenance that hadn't been properly canceled after Line 7 was decommissioned. I asked about the thermal signatures. Greg reviewed the feeds. He agreed they were unusual but noted that thermal cameras sometimes captured reflections or residual heat patterns that resembled human shapes. He recommended I submit a formal incident report and request a structural survey of the tunnel to rule out safety issues. I submitted my report on December 14th. The hospital administration responded on December 16th, acknowledging the report and confirming that a survey had been scheduled. They reiterated that Line 7 was isolated and posed no operational risk. On December 17th, I installed a secondary pressure gauge on Line 7, a standalone device that recorded data independent of the building management system. If the pressure fluctuations were real, the standalone gauge would capture them. On December 18th at 00:43 a.m., both gauges registered the same drop, 2.9 psi. The building management system logged the event as a routine inspection. The standalone gauge logged it as unexplained pressure loss consistent with localized steam usage. I descended to the maintenance tunnel on December 19th at 00:30 a.m. I propped the door open and positioned myself at the midpoint of the tunnel with a thermal imaging handheld device. At 00:43 a.m., the pressure dropped. I scanned the tunnel with the handheld device. The screen showed the thermal gradient of the pipes, the walls, and my own heat signature. No additional signatures. I returned to the boiler room and reviewed the fixed thermal camera feed. The feed showed the familiar heat signature moving through the tunnel at 00:43 a.m., pausing at the midpoint and continuing to the far end. According to the feed, the signature passed directly through the space where I had been standing. On December 20th, I reviewed the restricted area beyond the sealed bulkhead door. According to the original blueprints, the area contained a secondary utility chase and a small equipment room that had been abandoned during the 2003 upgrade. The bulkhead door had been welded shut to prevent unauthorized access. I contacted the facilities coordinator and requested authorization to cut through the bulkhead. Greg asked why. I explained that Line 7 extended into the restricted area, and that the pressure fluctuations might be caused by residual steam trapped in the capped end of the pipe. Greg approved the request and scheduled a contractor for December 23rd. The contractor cut through the weld and opened the bulkhead door on December 23rd at 2 p.m. The space beyond was narrow and dark, with a low ceiling and exposed piping. Line 7 extended through the space and terminated at a capped end about 30 feet from the bulkhead. I inspected the cap. It was sealed intact, showing no signs of leakage. I checked the pressure on Line 7 at the capped end. 0 psi. The line was fully isolated. I walked back through the restricted area and returned to the maintenance tunnel. The contractor resealed the bulkhead door. I returned to the boiler room and reviewed the thermal feed. On December 23rd at 00:43 a.m., 10 hours in the future, the thermal signature appeared in the tunnel. It followed the same route, paused at the same location, and exited the frame at the sealed bulkhead. I watched the feed at 00:43 a.m. on December 24th. The signature appeared on schedule. It moved through the tunnel, paused, and approached the bulkhead door. The door remained sealed. The signature passed through it. On December 26th, I submitted a supplemental report documenting the bulkhead inspection and the continued anomalies. I recommended decommissioning the thermal camera and removing Line 7 from the building management system entirely. The hospital administration responded on December 28th. They acknowledged the report and confirmed that the thermal camera had been flagged for replacement. They noted that the pressure fluctuations were within acceptable tolerances for a decommissioned line and posed no safety risk. I accepted their response because I had no alternative. But I still monitor Line 7 every night. The pressure drops at 00:43 a.m. The thermal signature moves through the tunnel, performs its inspection, and exits through a sealed door. The building management system logs each event as routine maintenance, authorized and completed by gains. I no longer try to reconcile the data. The system recognizes the work being done, even if I'm not the one doing it. Some maintenance continues on schedules older than the staff assigned to perform it. Completed by presence, the cameras can see, but the doors cannot stop. Story 4. Camera 12 recorded continuously. The feed never dropped, not once in 4 months of continuous operation. I sat in the surveillance room at 02:18 a.m., watching Camera 12 display an unused supply corridor with perfect clarity. No signal loss, no frame skips, no maintenance interruptions. The corridor was empty. It had been empty for 6 years since the hospital rerouted supply traffic through the renovated B1 wing, but the motion detection log showed activation every night between 01 and 0300 hours. I scrubbed through the footage. At 01:37 a.m., a figure entered the frame from the right, walking with deliberate, measured steps. The gait was familiar. I measured the stride length, the pace, the posture. The motion analysis software returned a 94.7% match to my own movement pattern. The figure paused at the camera, looked up, and adjusted the lens angle. The timestamp on that frame read 01:37 a.m., December 30th. It was currently 02:18 a.m., December 29th. I was watching myself perform a task I hadn't done yet. My name is Claire Donovan. I've worked as a facilities surveillance technician at Riverside General Hospital for 7 years. My role involves monitoring the hospital's security camera system, maintaining video feeds, addressing technical issues, and reviewing footage for incident reports. The hospital operates over 200 cameras covering every public area, patient wing, utility corridor, and parking structure. Most of my work involves routine checks and occasional troubleshooting, but the system is reliable, and serious issues are rare. Camera 12 monitored a supply corridor on basement level 1, section C. The corridor was approximately 60 feet long, connecting a former storage area to a loading dock that had been relocated during a 2018 renovation. After the renovation, the corridor saw minimal traffic, occasional maintenance access, rare storage overflow, but it remained part of the camera network for liability purposes. The feed from Camera 12 was archived but not actively monitored unless flagged by motion detection or manual review. I first noticed the anomaly on December 27th during a routine system audit. The audit involved reviewing data logs for every camera to identify performance issues, signal dropouts, frame rate inconsistencies, storage errors. Most cameras showed occasional interruptions, brief outages during power fluctuations, maintenance resets, lens obstructions. Camera 12 showed none. The feed had been continuous without interruption for 123 days. I pulled up the performance log. Camera 12 had been installed in 2017 as part of the basement level security upgrade. Over the past 7 years, the camera had experienced 14 documented outages due to power issues, network errors, and scheduled maintenance. But since September 1st of this year, the feed had been flawless. 0 signal dropouts, 0 frame skips, 100% uptime. I checked the other cameras on basement level 1. All showed normal performance with occasional minor interruptions. Camera 12 was an outlier. I flagged it for review and moved on. On December 28th, I accessed the motion detection logs for Camera 12. Motion detection was a software feature that analyzed video feeds for movement and flagged events for later review. It reduced storage requirements and helped identify relevant footage during incident investigations. Most cameras logged sporadic motion, staff passing through, equipment transport, maintenance activity. Camera 12 logged consistent motion every night between 01 and 0300 hours. I reviewed the flagged events. Each entry noted the same pattern. Motion detected, duration approximately 45 to 90 seconds, movement consistent with human presence. I pulled up the footage for December 20th at 01:37 a.m. The feed showed the empty corridor, concrete floor, white walls, overhead fluorescent lighting. At 01:37 a.m., a figure entered the frame from the right side. The person wore standard hospital maintenance attire, dark blue work pants, a gray long-sleeve shirt, a utility belt. They walked down the corridor at a measured pace, paused midway to examine something on the wall, then continued to the left side of the frame and exited. I advanced the footage. At 02:14 a.m., the figure returned, walking from left to right, and exited the frame. I checked the access logs. Basement level 1, section C required keycard access. The log showed no entries for December 20th between 01 and 0300 hours. I reviewed additional footage. December 21st, same figure, same movement pattern, same timeline. December 22nd, same. I went back further. The pattern appeared every night since September 1st. On December 29th, I reported the anomaly to the hospital's security coordinator, a man named Thomas Ridley, who'd worked at Riverside for 12 years. I showed him the footage and the access logs. Tom watched the clips carefully, then asked if I'd identified the person in the footage. I explained that the camera angle and lighting made facial identification difficult, but the movement patterns and attire suggested a maintenance worker. Tom pulled up the maintenance schedules. No authorized work was scheduled for that corridor during overnight hours. He checked the maintenance staff roster. None of the overnight technicians matched the build or height of the figure in the footage. He asked if the footage could be archived from an earlier date, mistakenly logged as recent. I confirmed that the timestamps were accurate. The feeds were live recordings, not archived material. Tom suggested I review the footage for December 29th, the current night, and report if the pattern continued. I agreed. At 01:30 a.m. on December 29th, I sat in the surveillance room with camera 12 displayed on the primary monitor. The corridor was empty, lit by the steady glow of overhead fluorescence. At 01:37 a.m., the figure entered the frame from the right, same attire, same gait, same measured pace. The figure walked to the midpoint of the corridor and paused. They looked directly at the camera, then reached up and adjusted the lens angle slightly. The frame shifted upward. The figure nodded as if satisfied and exited the frame to the left. I rewound the footage and paused on the moment when the figure looked at the camera. The lighting obscured details, but the posture was familiar. I ran a motion analysis, a software tool that measured gait, stride length, and posture to identify individuals based on movement patterns. The software compared the footage to a database of known staff movement profiles. The analysis returned a 94.7% match. C. Donovan. I stared at the result. The figure in the footage moved like me. I checked the footage again. The stride length matched my own. The posture matched. The way the figure adjusted the camera, reaching up with the right hand, tilting the lens with a practiced motion, matched how I performed routine camera adjustments. I checked my badge. It was clipped to my belt. I checked the access logs. No entries under my name for basement level 1, section C. I called Tom Ridley. He returned to the surveillance room at 02:05 a.m. I showed him the motion analysis. Tom watched the footage, then asked if I'd been down to that corridor recently. I confirmed that I hadn't been to basement level 1, section C in over 3 months. He asked if anyone else had access to my credentials. I said no. Tom suggested I review the footage from earlier dates and perform motion analysis on those clips. I pulled up footage from December 15th, same figure. Motion analysis, 94.7% match. December 1st, same result. September 1st, same result. Tom asked if the camera could be malfunctioning, generating some kind of looped playback. I explained that the feed was live, continuously recorded without loops or repeated segments. The motion detection logs confirmed unique events every night, different durations, slight variations in movement. Tom requested a physical inspection of camera 12 in the corridor. I agreed to meet him on basement level 1 at 08:30 a.m. We descended to basement level 1, section C at 08:45 a.m. on December 29th. The corridor looked exactly as it appeared in the footage. Concrete floor, white walls, fluorescent lighting. The space was empty and silent. Camera 12 was mounted on the ceiling at the midpoint of the corridor, angled downward to capture the length of the space. I examined the camera. It was a standard model, securely mounted, no signs of tampering. I checked the lens angle. It had been adjusted recently, tilted slightly upward, exactly as the footage from 01:37 a.m. had shown. I checked my maintenance logs. I hadn't adjusted camera 12. No work orders had been filed for that camera. I asked Tom if any other technicians had accessed the area. He checked his records. No entries since November. We returned to the surveillance room. Tom asked me to monitor camera 12 continuously for the next week, and to alert him immediately if the figure appeared during hours when I could provide an alibi. I agreed. On December 30th at 01:37 a.m., I sat in the surveillance room watching camera 12. The figure entered the frame on schedule. I checked my reflection in the monitor beside me. I was sitting in the surveillance room. The figure in the footage was walking down the corridor. I radioed Tom. He arrived within 5 minutes. We watched the feed together. The figure completed its routine and exited the frame at 02:14 a.m. Tom asked if I had a twin or a sibling who worked at the hospital. I said no. He asked if anyone else could have accessed my motion profile data. I explained that motion profiles were automatically generated by the surveillance software and stored locally. No external access. Tom requested a comprehensive audit of Camera 12's data, including installation records, maintenance history, and network diagnostics. I compiled the report over the next 2 days. The audit revealed the following. Camera 12 had been installed on March 14, 2017. It had experienced 14 outages over the next 7 years due to routine issues. On September 1, 2024, the camera's performance became flawless. 0 outages, 0 errors, continuous operation. On the same date, motion detection logs began recording nightly activity in the corridor. I cross-referenced September 1st with hospital records. No maintenance was performed on Camera 12. No software updates, no network changes. The camera simply began operating perfectly. I reviewed the footage from August 31st, the night before the pattern began. The corridor was empty. No motion detected. At 05:43 a.m. on September 1st, the figure appeared for the first time. Same attire, same gait. The figure walked the length of the corridor, paused at the camera, and adjusted the lens angle. I checked my work schedule. On September 1st, I'd been on duty in the surveillance room from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I had no memory of accessing basement level 1, section C. On January 2nd, I installed a secondary camera in the corridor, a standalone unit with independent storage that recorded directly to a local DREIT bypassing the hospital's network. If the figure appeared, the secondary camera would capture it independently. On January 3rd at 01:37 a.m., Camera 12 recorded the figure walking through the corridor. The secondary camera recorded an empty corridor. The timestamps matched. The footage was simultaneous. Camera 12 showed the figure performing its routine. The secondary camera showed nothing. I reviewed both feeds frame by frame. At 01:52 a.m., the figure in Camera 12's feed paused directly in front of the secondary camera. The figure looked at the secondary camera's lens, tilted their head slightly, then reached up and adjusted the lens angle. The secondary camera's feed shifted upward, matching the adjustment. But the secondary camera's footage showed no one. The lens adjusted on its own. I submitted a formal incident report on January 4th. I documented the continuous operation anomaly, the motion detection logs, the motion analysis results, and the dual camera test. I recommended decommissioning Camera 12 and conducting a full network security audit. The hospital administration responded on January 6th. They acknowledged the report and confirmed that a security audit had been scheduled. They noted that Camera 12 was functioning correctly from a technical standpoint and that the footage provided reliable documentation of the corridor. They suggested that the motion analysis software might be generating false positives due to calibration issues. I accepted their response, but I still monitor Camera 12 every night. The feed never drops. The figure appears on schedule. The motion analysis confirms it's me, or someone who moves exactly like me, who knows how I work, who adjusts cameras with the same practiced motion I use. The footage is indexed, archived, and logged as routine surveillance. And somewhere in the hospital's data system, my credentials authorize this presence. documenting inspections I never performed in a corridor I've stopped visiting because I know someone else is already there, maintaining the equipment with perfect consistency. Story 5. The water pump audit. The flow meter registered usage at 03:41 a.m., 12.4 gallons over 90 seconds. I stood in the basement level 2 utility room staring at the data logs, trying to identify which fixture had drawn water from line 14. Line 14 had been capped in 2015 after the hospital rerouted plumbing during a renovation. No fixtures existed on that line. No toilets, no sinks, no drains, but the flow meter insisted otherwise. Steady usage, consistent with human activity, washing hands, flushing a toilet, filling a container. The pump cycled smoothly, responding to demand as if the fixtures still existed. I checked the maintenance logs on the building management system. Line 14 had been inspected at 03:41 a.m. The inspection was logged under my credentials, documenting routine testing of water pressure and drainage. I checked my watch. It was currently 03:56 a.m. I hadn't inspected anything. Not yet. My name is Michael Pruitt. I've worked as a plumbing systems specialist at Riverside General Hospital for 14 years. My responsibilities include maintaining water supply lines, drainage systems, backflow prevention, and pressure regulation. The hospital's plumbing infrastructure is complex, with multiple supply lines serving different wings and levels, and my role is to ensure that water flows where it's needed and drains where it's supposed to go. The hospital's plumbing system was upgraded in 2009 with additional modifications during subsequent renovations. Most of the infrastructure is straightforward, but older sections, particularly in the basement levels, retain legacy piping from the original 1963 structure. Line 14 was one of those legacy lines. Line 14 originated at a main supply junction in basement level 2 and extended through a utility chase to a cluster of fixtures that once served a staff locker room. The locker room was relocated during a 2015 renovation, and the fixtures were removed. Rather than demolish the piping, the hospital capped line 14 at the junction and redirected water flow through newer lines. The cap was a straightforward procedure: shut off the supply valve, drain the line, install a threaded cap, and mark the system as inactive. I assisted with the work myself. By 2016, line 14 was functionally abandoned, present in the blueprints but no longer part of the active plumbing network. The anomaly began on January 7th. I was reviewing flow meter data as part of my routine monthly audit. Flow meters track water usage across the hospital, measuring gallons consumed per line per day. The data helps identify leaks, inefficiencies, and unusual consumption patterns. Most lines show predictable usage curves: high during the day, moderate overnight, low during early morning hours. Line 14 showed zero consumption until January 1st. On January 1st at 03:41 a.m., line 14 registered 12.4 gallons of usage over 90 seconds. I assumed it was a sensor error. Capped lines sometimes generate phantom readings due to pressure fluctuations or thermal expansion. I made a note to recalibrate the flow meter and moved on. The following night, the same reading appeared: 12.4 gallons, 90 seconds, 03:41 a.m. On January 9th, I reviewed the data history. Line 14 had been recording usage every night since January 1st. The pattern was consistent: 12.4 gallons, 90 seconds, 03:41 a.m. The consumption profile suggested deliberate human activity. Not a leak, not a pressure fluctuation, but intentional use of fixtures. I descended to basement level 2 and inspected the supply junction. The cap was intact, properly sealed, showing no signs of leakage. I checked the valve. It was fully closed, locked with a tag confirming inactive status. I tested the pressure upstream and downstream. Upstream, 65 psi. Downstream, 0 psi. The line was isolated, but the flow meter still registered usage. I replaced the flow meter on January 10th. The new meter showed the same readings. I tested the sensor calibration. Normal. I inspected the piping downstream of the cap. It was dry, empty, showing no evidence of water flow. On January 11th, I accessed the building management system and reviewed Line 14's maintenance history. The system showed regular inspections dating back to 2016, all logged as completed with no issues noted. I scrolled through the entries. Each inspection was documented with the same level of detail. Water pressure checked, drainage confirmed, fixtures operational. The most recent entry was dated January 7th at 03:41 a.m. Inspector, M. Pruitt. I hadn't performed any inspection on January 7th. I checked my work logs. On January 7th, I'd been at home until 11 p.m., then worked in the boiler room from 11:30 p.m. to 6 a.m. I hadn't been near line 14. I checked the other inspection entries. January 6th, January 5th, January 4th. Every night since January 1st, an inspection was logged at 03:41 a.m., all signed with my credentials. On January 12th, I contacted the facilities coordinator, Greg Linderman. I explained the situation, flow meter readings on a capped line, automated maintenance logs I hadn't written, inspections documented for a system that no longer existed. Greg reviewed the data remotely. He acknowledged the anomalies but noted that the flow readings were within normal tolerances for active fixtures. He suggested the building management system might be auto-generating logs based on legacy maintenance schedules. I asked if we could physically inspect the area downstream of the cap, the utility chase where line 14 extended to the former locker room. Greg approved the request and scheduled access for January 14th. I descended to basement level 2 on January 14th at 10 a.m. The utility chase was located behind a locked access panel in a storage corridor. I removed the panel and examined the chase. It was narrow, vertical, lined with piping and conduit. Line 14 ran downward from the junction, descending about 15 feet before terminating at a horizontal section that once fed the locker room fixtures. I followed the line. The piping was copper, aged but intact, secured to the chase wall with metal brackets. At the bottom of the chase, the line transitioned from vertical to horizontal and extended through the wall into the former locker room space, now a repurposed storage area filled with unused furniture and equipment. I checked the wall penetration. The pipe extended through, but the locker room side had been sealed with drywall during the renovation. I returned to the basement level 2 utility room and reviewed the flow meter data. On January 14th at 03:41 a.m., 17 hours in the future, line 14 would register 12.4 gallons of usage. I decided to monitor the line in real time. At 03:30 a.m. on January 15th, I positioned myself in the utility room with a tablet displaying live flow data and a handheld pressure gauge connected to the upstream side of the cap. At 03:41 a.m., the flow meter registered activity, 12.4 gallons over 90 seconds. I checked the pressure gauge. It showed stable pressure, no drop, no fluctuation. The cap was holding. No water was flowing downstream, but the flow meter insisted otherwise. I checked the data log on my tablet. The system documented the usage as legitimate. Water drawn from line 14 distributed to fixtures drained through the system. The log noted the event as routine usage during authorized maintenance. I reviewed the maintenance logs. An inspection was logged for 03:41 a.m., January 15th. Inspector M. Pruitt. I checked the timestamp. The inspection had been logged in real time, while I stood in the utility room watching the flow meter. On January 16th, I installed a secondary flow meter on line 14. The device was independent, battery-powered, recording data locally without connecting to the building management system. If water was actually flowing, the secondary meter would confirm it. On January 17th at 03:41 a.m., both meters registered the same reading, 12.4 gallons over 90 seconds. The building management system logged the event. The secondary meter logged the event. Both confirmed water flow through a line that was physically capped and drained. I descended to the utility chase at 03:50 a.m. and inspected the piping. It was dry. I placed my hand on the copper line. Cool to the touch. No vibration, no indication of water movement. I returned to the utility room and checked the meters. Both showed usage had occurred 11 minutes earlier. On January 18th, I reviewed the hospital blueprints and identified the exact locations of the fixtures that once served the locker room. The blueprints listed 2 sinks, 3 toilets, and 1 shower. I calculated the water usage for typical activity at those fixtures. Washing hands at a sink, approximately 2 gallons. Flushing a toilet, approximately 1.6 gallons per flush. Running a shower briefly, approximately 5 gallons. The total usage, 12.4 gallons over 90 seconds, matched a plausible sequence. Flush a toilet, wash hands, briefly run the shower. It was consistent with a person using the locker room after a shift or before starting one. I accessed the hospital's human resources records and searched for maintenance staff assigned to overnight shifts in 2015, before the locker room was relocated. My name appeared on the roster. I'd worked overnight maintenance during that period, and I'd used the locker room regularly. I pulled up my old work schedule. In 2015, my shift typically ended around 03:30 a.m. I'd often used the locker room at 03:45 a.m. before heading home. The water usage pattern on line 14 matched my routine from 9 years ago. On January 20th, I submitted a formal incident report. I documented the flow meter readings, the automated maintenance logs, the historical usage patterns, and my hypothesis that the building management system was somehow replicating data from 2015. I recommended decommissioning line 14 entirely and removing it from the monitoring system. The hospital administration responded on January 22nd. They acknowledged the report and confirmed that line 14 would be flagged for removal during the next system audit. They noted that the flow readings, while anomalous, posed no operational risk. On January 23rd, I descended to the former locker room space during the day. The area was cluttered with storage but accessible. I located the wall where the fixtures had been installed. The drywall was smooth, painted, showing no evidence of the plumbing that once existed behind it. I pressed my hand against the wall. It was solid. No gaps, no access. On January 24th at 03:41 a.m., I stood in the former locker room with a stethoscope pressed against the wall at the location where the sink had been installed. The flow meter in the utility room registered 12.4 gallons of usage. I listened. Through the wall, I heard water running, faint but distinct. The sound lasted approximately 30 seconds, then stopped. I heard another sound, the mechanical rush of a toilet flushing. Then silence. I pulled the stethoscope away and examined the wall. Solid, sealed, no fixtures. I returned to the utility room and checked the flow meter. Usage confirmed, maintenance log updated, inspection completed by M. Pruitt at 03:41 a.m. On January 26th, I reviewed archived security footage from 2015. The hospital's camera system had been upgraded in 2017, but some older footage remained archived. I found clips from the basement level 2 corridor near the locker room, dated March through May 2015. The footage showed me entering and exiting the locker room at various times during my overnight shifts. I isolated footage from March 18, 2015. At 03:46 a.m., I entered the locker room. The timestamp matched the current pattern. 03:41 a.m., adjusted for the 5-minute walk from my usual work location to the locker room. I scrubbed through additional footage. The pattern was consistent throughout 2015. I used the locker room regularly after my shifts, always around 03:45 a.m. On January 28th, I stopped trying to resolve the anomaly. The system recognizes usage that no longer physically occurs. The flow meters document water consumption through fixtures that were removed 9 years ago. The maintenance logs record inspections I perform on a schedule I stopped following when the locker room was relocated. And every night at 03:41 a.m., Line 14 responds to demand that exists only in the system's memory, a routine preserved in data, replicated in logs and marked as authorized because it was once part of my normal work. Some routines persist long after the infrastructure changes, maintained by systems that remember the patterns even when the people have moved on. Story 6. Restricted Storage Room Inventory. The access log updated at 02:33 a.m., documenting removal of 6 sterile procedure packs from room B311. I sat in the logistics office reviewing inventory data, waiting for the corresponding requisition form to appear in the system. It didn't. I pulled up the camera feed for B311. The door remained closed, the keypad indicator steady red. No entry, no exit. But the inventory count had decreased by 6 units. I checked the previous transactions. Room B311 had been restocking and redistributing supplies every night since December 15th. Items removed, logged, and returned on a schedule that matched hospital procedure perfectly. The access authorizations listed legacy staff credentials that had been decommissioned in 2012. I reviewed the camera footage frame by frame. At 02:33 a.m., the keypad blinked green. The door remained closed. Inside, visible through the small wire-reinforced window, the shelves shifted. 6 procedure packs moved from their positions on the 3rd shelf to the staging area near the door. No one was in the room. My name is Angela Frost. I've worked as a hospital logistics technician at Riverside General for 10 years. My role involves managing medical supply inventory, coordinating distribution to patient care areas, and maintaining accurate records of stock levels, usage, and reordering. The hospital operates a centralized supply system with primary storage on basement level 1 and secondary storage in distributed locations throughout the building. Room B311 is one of those secondary storage locations. B311 is a small, secured room on basement level 3, originally used for overflow sterile supplies and specialty equipment. The room is approximately 12 feet by 15 feet, with metal shelving units along 3 walls and a small staging area near the door. Access is restricted to logistics staff and authorized nursing supervisors. The door is secured with a keypad lock tied to the building management system, and the room is monitored by a single overhead camera. In 2019, the hospital transitioned most specialty supplies to a new storage facility on the ground floor, and B311 was gradually phased out. By 2020, the room held minimal inventory, mostly outdated stock awaiting disposition. The room remained locked and monitored, but was no longer part of active supply distribution. The anomaly began on December 15th. I was performing my monthly inventory audit when I noticed a discrepancy in room B311. The system showed recent transactions, items removed, items returned, stock levels fluctuating. I pulled up the transaction log. On December 15th at 02:33 a.m., 6 sterile procedure packs were removed from B311. On December 16th at 02:51 a.m., the same 6 packs were returned and 4 surgical drape kits were removed. The pattern continued nightly. I assumed the transactions were data entry errors. Room B311 wasn't part of active distribution, and no staff had reason to access it during overnight hours. I made a note to review the logs with the inventory coordinator and moved on. On December 17th, I checked the access logs. The logs showed keycard entries for B311 every night since December 15th. Each entry was authorized under credentials listed as J. Halloran, a logistics supervisor who had retired in 2012. I cross-referenced the credentials with the hospital's HR system. Judith Halloran had worked at Riverside for 23 years before retiring. Her keycard had been deactivated on her last day. Her credentials should not have been active. I contacted the IT department and requested an audit of J. Halloran's access credentials. The IT technician confirmed that her keycard had been properly deactivated and removed from the system. No active credentials existed under her name, but the access logs insisted otherwise. On December 18th, I descended to basement level 3 and inspected room B311. The door was closed. The keypad indicator read. I swiped my own keycard. The indicator blinked green and the lock disengaged. I opened the door. The room was dimly lit by a single overhead fixture. The shelves held scattered supplies, outdated procedure packs, expired surgical kits, and miscellaneous items awaiting disposal. I counted the inventory manually. The count matched the system's recorded levels, adjusted for the transactions logged over the past 3 days. I checked the staging area near the door. It was empty. I examined the shelves. The items were organized neatly, arranged by type and expiration date. The organization was precise, consistent with proper inventory management procedures. I left the room and reviewed the camera feed on my tablet. The camera showed the room exactly as I'd found it. Shelves stocked, staging area empty, no signs of recent activity. I rewound the feed to 02:33 a.m. on December 18th. The feed showed the room in low light. At 02:33 a.m., the keypad indicator blinked green. The door remained closed. Through the wire-reinforced window, I saw movement inside. The shelves shifted. 3 items moved from the second shelf to the staging area. The movement was smooth, deliberate, as if someone were selecting and relocating stock. I watched the feed for 90 seconds. At 03:04 a.m., the items returned to the shelves. The keypad blinked green again. The door remained closed. On December 19th, I reported the anomaly to the inventory coordinator, a woman named Lisa Brenner who'd worked at Riverside for 18 years. I showed her the transaction logs, the access logs, and the camera footage. Lisa reviewed everything carefully, then asked if I'd verified that the inventory counts were accurate. I confirmed that they were. She asked if the camera could be malfunctioning. I explained that the feed was live and continuous. No loops, no playback errors. Lisa suggested that someone might be using cloned credentials to access the room and perform unauthorized inventory activity. She recommended changing the access codes for B311 and installing a secondary lock. I changed the access codes on December 20th. On December 21st at 02:33 a.m., the access log updated, entry authorized under J. Halloran. The new code had been bypassed. The transaction log showed 4 wound care kits removed and returned within 90 minutes. I installed a secondary lock, a physical deadbolt that required a key, on December 21st. On December 22nd at 02:33 a.m., the access log updated. The transaction log showed activity. I descended to basement level 3 at 03 a.m. The deadbolt was locked. I unlocked it and opened the door. The room appeared undisturbed, but the inventory count had changed. 3 items were missing from the first shelf. I reviewed the camera feed. At 02:33 a.m., the keypad blinked green. The deadbolt remained locked. Through the window, I saw movement inside. 3 items moved from the first shelf to the staging area, then disappeared from the frame. On December 23rd, I submitted a formal incident report to the facilities coordinator, Greg Linderman. I documented the transaction logs, the access logs under deactivated credentials, the camera footage showing movement inside a locked room, and the failure of new access codes and physical locks to prevent the activity. Greg reviewed the report and requested a physical inventory audit of room B311 to confirm that items were actually being moved. I conducted the audit on December 24th at 9 a.m. with Lisa Brenner as a witness. We entered the room and counted every item on the shelves. The count matched the system's recorded levels exactly. We marked each item with a small adhesive tag showing its position and shelf location. We photographed the room from multiple angles. We locked the door, engaged the deadbolt, and left. On December 25th at 02:33 a.m., the transaction log updated. 2 orthopedic supply kits removed, 1 returned. I reviewed the camera feed. The tagged items moved. At 02:33 a.m., 2 kits on the second shelf shifted position. The adhesive tags remained attached. The kits moved to the staging area, then returned to the shelves 90 minutes later, not to their original positions but to adjacent slots. I descended to basement level 3 at 06 a.m. on December 25th. The deadbolt was locked. I opened the door and checked the shelves. The 2 orthopedic supply kits were in different positions than we documented. The adhesive tags were intact. The items had been moved, handled, and returned. On December 26th, I reviewed archived footage dating back to 2019 before room B311 was phased out. The camera feed showed regular activity. Logistics staff entering the room, selecting supplies, updating logs, and leaving. I recognized several former colleagues, including Judith Halloran. I isolated footage from October 2011. Judith entered the room at 02:38 a.m., reviewed the shelves, removed 6 sterile procedure packs, logged the transaction on a clipboard, and left. Her movements were efficient, practiced, methodical. I compared the footage to the current activity. The movement patterns matched. Items were selected using the same sequence Judith had used. The staging area was utilized identically. The timing was consistent. On December 27th, I contacted Judith Halloran via the hospital's retiree outreach program. We spoke by phone. I explained that I was reviewing historical inventory procedures and asked about her work routines during overnight shifts. Judith recalled her time at Riverside fondly. She explained that she'd often worked late shifts and had managed room B311 personally. She described her routine: check stock levels, select items for restocking patient care areas, log transactions, and return unused items before the end of her shift. She typically performed this work around 02:30 a.m. after completing other tasks. I asked if she remembered using specific procedures for organizing the room. She said yes. She'd developed a system for arranging supplies by type, urgency, and expiration date. She'd trained other staff on the system, and it had become standard practice. I thanked her and ended the call. I didn't mention the current activity in B311. On December 28th, I reviewed the transaction logs in detail. The items being moved were consistent with Judith's historical routines. restocking high turnover supplies, rotating stock based on expiration dates, redistributing overstock to primary storage. The system was executing procedures Judith had established 12 years ago, following her schedule, using her credentials and replicating her workflow with perfect accuracy. On December 29th, I installed a motion sensor inside room B311. The sensor was independent of the building management system, recording data locally. If someone, or something, was physically moving items, the sensor would detect it. On December 30th at 02:33 a.m., the motion sensor recorded activity. The data showed movement consistent with a human presence. Walking pace, pauses at the shelves, deliberate motion. The camera feed showed items moving. The access log showed entry under J. Halloran. The door remained closed and locked. I descended to basement level 3 at 03 a.m. The deadbolt was locked. I unlocked it and entered the room. The motion sensor's data log showed activity ending at 03:02 a.m., 2 minutes before my arrival. The room was silent, the shelves were organized, the staging area was empty. I checked the sensor's position. It was mounted on the wall opposite the door, angled to cover the entire room. I reviewed the recorded data. The movement had originated near the door, proceeded to the shelves, and returned to the door before ceasing. On January 2nd, I submitted a supplemental report documenting the motion sensor data, the archived footage comparisons, and my conversation with Judith Halloran. I recommended sealing room B311 and relocating the remaining inventory to active storage. The hospital administration responded on January 4th. They acknowledged the report and confirmed that B311 would be cleared and sealed during the next scheduled maintenance cycle. They noted that the inventory transactions, while irregular, had not resulted in any loss or discrepancy. On January 5th, the logistics team cleared room B311. We removed all remaining inventory, cleaned the shelves, and locked the door. The room was officially decommissioned. The keypad was deactivated. The camera remained active for security purposes. On January 6th at 02:33 a.m., the access log updated. Entry authorized under J. Halloran. The transaction log showed 6 sterile procedure packs removed from B311. I reviewed the camera feed. The shelves were empty. The room was cleared, but the staging area showed movement, items appearing, being organized, and disappearing. The inventory system recorded the transactions as legitimate. The access logs documented the entries. The procedures continued, executed by credentials the system still recognizes, following routines established by someone who trained the staff and organized the supplies with care. And every night, room B311 operates according to a schedule that predates its decommissioning. Managed by presence, the cameras record, but the locks cannot prevent. Story 7. The generator load test. The backup generators engaged at 04:17 a.m. under simulated failure conditions. Responding to a test scenario I'd scheduled for 0800 hours. I stood in the emergency power systems room watching the load curve climb steadily, matching the electrical demand of a fully occupied ward. The generators weren't supposed to be running. The test wasn't supposed to start for another 3 hours and 43 minutes. But the system had initiated the test on its own, drawing power as if the hospital were operating at full capacity during overnight hours when most departments were minimally staffed. I checked the distribution map. The load was concentrated in sublevel B, a decommissioned floor that hadn't received power since 2016. The cameras confirmed what the generators were responding to. Lights turning on in sequence, room by room, as if someone were performing a methodical inspection. The system labeled the test as live occupancy. The authorization log listed the test parameters under my credentials, scheduled for 04:17 a.m. I hadn't scheduled anything for that time. Not yet. My name is Victor Hayes. I've worked as an emergency power systems engineer at Riverside General Hospital for 16 years. My role involves maintaining the hospital's backup generators, uninterruptible power supplies, automatic transfer switches, and load management systems. In a hospital, reliable power is critical. Patient care equipment, life support systems, surgical suites, and climate control all depend on continuous electrical supply. My job is to ensure that if the primary power fails, the backup systems engage seamlessly. Riverside General's emergency power system consists of 3 diesel generators with a combined output of 3,000 kilowatts, sufficient to supply the entire hospital during an extended outage. The generators are tested monthly under simulated load conditions to verify performance and identify maintenance needs. The tests are scheduled during low activity periods, typically mid-morning, to minimize disruption. I scheduled the January load test for January 8th at 0800 hours. The test protocol involved disconnecting the hospital from the primary grid, engaging the generators and running them under incrementally increasing load for 90 minutes while monitoring performance metrics. The test was standard, routine, and documented weeks in advance. The anomaly began on January 7th. I was reviewing the generator maintenance logs at 11:30 p.m. when I noticed an entry I didn't recognize. The log showed a load test performed on January 7th at 04:17 a.m. I checked my schedule. No test was scheduled for that time. I reviewed the test parameters. The log documented a 90-minute test with load curves matching full hospital occupancy. Lighting, HVAC, medical equipment, elevators, everything. The test was marked as completed successfully with no issues noted. I checked the generator runtime meters. The meters confirmed the generators had run for 90 minutes on January 7th, from 04:17 a.m. to 05:47 a.m. Fuel consumption matched, electrical output matched, the test had occurred. I contacted the hospital's facilities coordinator, Greg Linderman, and asked if he'd authorized an off-schedule test. He said no. He reviewed the logs remotely and confirmed that no authorization had been issued for a test on January 7th. He suggested I review the automatic transfer switch logs to determine if a power disruption had triggered the generators. I checked the transfer switch logs. No disruptions. The primary grid had been stable. The generators had engaged without cause. On January 8th, I descended to the emergency power systems room at 7 a.m. to prepare for the scheduled 0800 hours test. The generators were in standby mode, fuel levels normal, coolant temperatures normal. I reviewed the control panel. The system was ready. I initiated the test at 0800 hours. The generators engaged smoothly. I monitored the load curve as it climbed, 20% capacity, 40%, 60%. At 80%, the load stabilized and I ran diagnostics on each generator. All returned normal. I completed the test at 09:30 a.m. and returned the system to standby mode. I documented the test in the maintenance log and noted that the unauthorized test on January 7th had not affected the generator's performance. On January 9th at 04:17 a.m., I received an alert on my phone. Emergency generators engaged. I was at home. I accessed the building management system remotely. The generators were running under load, drawing fuel, supplying power to the hospital. I checked the transfer switch. The primary grid was stable. No disruption, no failover trigger. The generators were running independently, as if performing a test. I called the hospital's overnight facilities supervisor, a man named Carl Jensen. He confirmed that the hospital had not lost power. Everything was operating normally. I asked him to check the emergency power systems room. He descended to the room and reported that the generators were running but that no alarms or alerts were active on the control panel. The system behaved as if a scheduled test were in progress. I monitored the system remotely. The load curve climbed steadily over 90 minutes, matching the pattern from January 7th. At 05:47 a.m., the generators disengaged and returned to standby mode. The maintenance log updated automatically. Load test completed successfully. 04:17 a.m., January 9th. Authorization, V. Hayes. I hadn't authorized any test. On January 10th, I reviewed the electrical distribution data for the hospital. During the unauthorized tests, the generators supplied power to the entire facility, but the primary grid also remained active. The hospital was receiving power from two sources simultaneously, a configuration that should have triggered safety interlocks and alarms. Instead, the system managed both sources smoothly, distributing load as if the redundancy were intentional. I pulled up the load distribution map for January 9th at 04:17 a.m. Most of the hospital showed minimal load, overnight lighting, life support systems, basic HVAC. But one section showed significantly elevated load, sublevel B. The decommissioned floor was drawing power equivalent to full occupancy. I checked the breaker panel records. Sublevel B had been disconnected from the emergency power system in 2016, the same time it was decommissioned. The breakers were tagged and locked, but the distribution map insisted that sublevel B was receiving power from the generators during the unauthorized tests. On January 11th, I descended to the main electrical distribution room and inspected the breaker panel for sublevel B. The breakers were locked in the off position, tagged with decommissioning labels. I tested the circuits downstream, 0 voltage. The circuits were dead, but the building management system showed active load on sublevel B during the generator tests. On January 12th at 04 a.m., I positioned myself in the emergency power systems room to observe the generators in real time. At 04:17 a.m., the generators engaged. I monitored the control panel. The load curve climbed steadily. I checked the distribution map on my tablet. Sublevel B showed active load, lighting, HVAC, equipment. I accessed the camera feeds for sublevel B. The cameras were mounted in the main corridor, the storage rooms, and the administrative office. Relics from when the floor was operational. The corridor lights were on, fluorescent panels glowing steadily down the length of the hall. The cameras showed empty spaces, no people, no movement, but the lights were active, the HVAC vents were cycling air, and the electrical load was real. At 04:32 a.m., the lights in the corridor began turning on in sequence, one section at a time, moving from the camera's left side to the right. The progression was deliberate, methodical, as if someone were walking down the hall and triggering motion sensors, but the cameras showed no one. I checked the motion sensor logs. The sensors on sublevel B were recording activation in sequence, consistent with a person walking at normal pace. The building management system interpreted the activations as legitimate occupancy and adjusted the load accordingly. At 05:47 a.m., the generators disengaged. The lights on sublevel B turned off in reverse sequence. The maintenance log updated, load test completed, all systems normal, authorization V. Hayes. On January 13th, I submitted a formal incident report. I documented the unauthorized generator engagements, the load distribution to sublevel B, the motion sensor activations, and the camera feeds showing lights operating in a decommissioned space. I recommended a full electrical audit and a physical inspection of sublevel B to identify the source of the load. The hospital administration responded on January 15th. They acknowledged the report and confirmed that an electrical audit had been scheduled. They noted that the generators were operating correctly and that the unauthorized tests had not posed any safety risk. On January 16th, I accompanied an electrical contractor to sublevel B. We accessed the floor through the stairwell from basement level 2. The corridor was dark as expected. The contractor tested the lighting circuits with a multimeter. 0 voltage. The lights were not receiving power. We walked the length of the corridor, checking every fixture. All dead. We descended to the electrical distribution room and reviewed the breaker panel again. The breakers for sublevel B were off, tagged, locked. The contractor tested the circuits at the panel. 0 voltage. On January 17th at 04:17 a.m., I watched the camera feeds from sublevel B. The generators engaged. The corridor lights turned on in sequence. I checked the multimeter readings I'd documented the previous day. The circuits had been dead, but the lights were on. I reviewed the generator load data. The electrical demand was real. The generators were supplying power. The fuel consumption matched. The load curves matched. But the circuits were physically disconnected. On January 18th, I reviewed historical generator test data dating back to 2010. The load curves from routine tests showed predictable patterns, steady increases to target capacity, minor fluctuations based on hospital activity, smooth decreases after testing. The unauthorized tests showed identical patterns, but the load was concentrated in areas that shouldn't have been drawing power. I compared the unauthorized test data to archive tests from 2015, before sublevel B was decommissioned. The load curves matched. The distribution patterns matched. The system was replicating generator tests from nearly 10 years ago, executing them on a schedule I hadn't set, and supplying power to infrastructure that had been disconnected. On January 19th, I installed independent load monitors on each generator. The monitors recorded electrical output directly, bypassing the building management system. If the generators were supplying power, the monitors would capture it independently. On January 20th at 04:17 a.m., the generators engaged. The building management system showed load distributed to sublevel B. The independent monitors showed 0 output. The generators were running, consuming fuel, and operating under load, but producing no measurable electrical output. I checked the generator meters. Runtime, 90 minutes. Fuel consumed 47 gallons. Output, 3,000 kilowatts. The meters confirmed the generators had performed work. The independent monitors confirmed they hadn't. On January 21st, I submitted a supplemental report documenting the independent monitor data and recommending immediate generator shutdown pending a comprehensive mechanical and electrical inspection. The hospital administration responded on January 23rd. They acknowledged the report and confirmed that a generator inspection had been scheduled for February 1st. They reiterated that the generators were operating safely and that the unauthorized tests had not impacted hospital operations. On January 24th, I reviewed the building management system's authorization logs. Every unauthorized test was logged under my credentials, with parameters I hadn't set, on a schedule I hadn't created. I checked the timestamps. The tests were scheduled in advance, logged days before they occurred, as if the system anticipated the need and prepared accordingly. On January 25th at 04:17 a.m., I stood in the emergency power systems room and watched the generators engage. The control panel showed normal operation. The building management system showed power distributed to sublevel B. The cameras showed lights turning on in sequence, motion sensors recording activation, HVAC system cycling. The hospital was operating a floor that didn't exist, powered by generators producing electricity that couldn't be measured, authorized by credentials I never used to schedule tests I never planned. I stopped trying to explain it. The system knows what it needs to do. It runs tests on a schedule older than the current infrastructure, supplies power to spaces that were disconnected years ago, and documents everything with perfect procedural accuracy. And somewhere beneath the hospital, lights turn on every night in a systematic inspection pattern maintained by load the generators recognize and respond to, even if the circuits insist nothing is there. Story 8. Final Basement Walkthrough. The renovation contract required a final baseline inspection of all basement levels before demolition began. I stood in my office at 9:43 a.m. on February 1st, reviewing the inspection checklist while my assistant confirmed the schedule with the contractors. The inspection was planned for 2 p.m., a methodical walkthrough of basement levels 1, 2, and 3, documenting the condition of each space before the hospital's infrastructure upgrade commenced. At 10:17 a.m., I received an alert from the building management system. Final basement inspection initiated at 0200 hours, February 1st. The inspection report was already filed, complete with detailed observations, photographs, and my digital signature. I opened the report. It documented every room, every corridor, every mechanical space. The observations were thorough, professional, and precise. The photographs showed spaces I hadn't visited in months, captured from angles that matched my typical inspection routine. The timestamp on the final entry read 0547 a.m. It was currently 10:19 a.m. The inspection I was scheduled to perform in less than 4 hours had already been completed, logged, and submitted. 6 hours before I'd even reviewed the checklist. My name is Thomas Brennan. I've served as the facilities director at Riverside General Hospital for 19 years. My role encompasses oversight of all building operations, infrastructure maintenance, safety compliance, and capital improvement projects. I manage a team of technicians, engineers, and support staff responsible for keeping the hospital functional 24 hours a day. The work is demanding, procedural, and essential. In January, the hospital board approved a comprehensive basement-level renovation project. The scope included upgrading mechanical systems, replacing aging infrastructure, and modernizing utility distribution throughout basement levels 1, 2, and 3. The project required baseline documentation of all existing conditions before demolition and construction could begin. As facilities director, I was responsible for coordinating the final inspection. The inspection was scheduled for February 1st at 2 p.m. I'd coordinated with the general contractor, the hospital's safety officer, and the capital projects manager. The plan was straightforward: systematically walk through each basement level, document the current condition of every significant space, photograph key infrastructure, and file a comprehensive report to serve as the project's reference baseline. I'd performed dozens of similar inspections over the years. The process was routine, methodical, and unremarkable. On the morning of February 1st, I arrived at my office at 8:30 a.m. and reviewed the inspection checklist I'd prepared. The checklist covered over 40 spaces across 3 basement levels: mechanical rooms, storage areas, utility corridors, electrical distribution rooms, and decommissioned sections. Each space required visual inspection, condition assessment, and photographic documentation. I estimated the inspection would take approximately 3 hours. At 10:17 a.m., I received an automated email from the building management system. Final baseline inspection report. Basement levels 1 to 3. Submitted. February 1st, 0547 hours. I opened the email. The report was comprehensive, 23 pages, formatted according to hospital standards, complete with observations, measurements, and embedded photographs. My digital signature appeared on the final page, authorizing the report for project use. I stared at the signature. I hadn't performed any inspection. I hadn't been in the basement since late January. I checked the timestamp on the report. The inspection had been conducted between 0200 hours and 0547 hours. Overnight, while I'd been at home asleep. I reviewed the report in detail. The observations were accurate and thorough. Each space was described with the level of detail I would have provided. Noting structural condition, identifying equipment requiring removal, documenting safety concerns. The photographs showed every space from multiple angles. I recognized the perspectives. They matched how I typically framed inspection photos, capturing both overview and detail shots. I checked the building management system's activity log. The report had been generated using my credentials at 0547 a.m. The system listed the inspection as completed successfully with no issues flagged. I called my assistant, Karen Miles, and asked if she'd scheduled an overnight inspection. She said no. The inspection was scheduled for 2 p.m. as planned. I explained that the system had logged an overnight inspection under my credentials. Karen accessed the system remotely and confirmed the report's existence. She suggested that the system might have auto-populated a report template using archived data from a previous inspection. I checked the photographs embedded in the report. They were not archived. They showed current conditions, equipment I'd recently relocated, signage I'd installed in January, paint marks from contractors who'd performed preliminary assessments the previous week. The photographs were recent, taken within the past 72 hours. On February 1st at 11 a.m., I descended to basement level 1 and walked through the spaces documented in the overnight report. Every observation matched. The mechanical room showed the same equipment placement noted in the report. The storage corridor showed the same clutter. The electrical distribution room showed the same panel configurations. The photographs were accurate representations of current conditions. I returned to my office and reviewed the building management system's access logs. The logs showed keycard entries throughout the basement levels between 0200 hours and 0547 hours on February 1st. All entries were authorized under my credentials. I checked my keycard. It was in my wallet where it had been all night. I contacted the hospital's IT security manager, a man named David Porter who'd worked at Riverside for 14 years. I explained the situation. An inspection report filed under my credentials, documenting work I hadn't performed, using photographs I hadn't taken. David reviewed the access logs and confirmed that my credentials had been used to enter multiple basement space during the overnight hours. He checked for credential cloning or unauthorized access. The system showed no anomalies. The entries were logged as legitimate. David suggested I review the security camera feeds to determine who had accessed the basement during the overnight hours. I accessed the camera feeds for basement level 1, 2, and 3. I scrubbed through footage from 0200 hours to 0547 hours. The cameras showed a figure moving systematically through the basement levels, entering rooms, inspecting equipment, taking photographs with a tablet. The figure wore hospital facilities attire, the same dark blue work pants and gray shirt I typically wore during inspections. The figure moved with deliberate, measured steps, pausing to examine infrastructure, documenting observations, proceeding to the next space. I couldn't see the figure's face clearly. The camera angles and lighting obscured details, but the posture, the gait, and the inspection methodology were familiar. I ran a motion analysis on the footage. The software compared the figure's movement patterns to known staff profiles. The analysis returned a 96.2% match. T. Brennan. I was watching myself perform an inspection I hadn't conducted. On February 1st at 1 p.m., I met with David Porter and the hospital's facilities coordinator, Greg Linderman, in my office. I showed them the report, the access logs, the camera footage, and the motion analysis. Greg watched the footage carefully, then asked if I had any memory of performing the inspection. I said no. He asked if I'd been sleepwalking or experiencing blackouts. I said no. David reviewed the motion analysis and confirmed the match. He noted that motion analysis was not foolproof. It measured gait and posture, which could be similar across individuals. But combined with the access logs and the report's accuracy, the evidence suggested that I, or someone who moved exactly like me, had performed the inspection. Greg asked if we should proceed with the scheduled 2 p.m. inspection or cancel it, given that a report had already been filed. I said we should proceed. I wanted to verify the report's accuracy and determine whether the overnight inspection had been real or some kind of elaborate data anomaly. At 2 p.m., I descended to basement level 1 with the general contractor, the safety officer, and the capital projects manager. We walked through the inspection checklist systematically, documenting each space, taking photographs, recording observations. The process took 3 hours and 20 minutes. We completed the inspection at 5:20 p.m. I returned to my office and compared the 2 p.m. inspection to the overnight report. The observations matched, the photographs matched, the assessments matched. The overnight report had documented everything we documented during the 2 p.m. inspection, 6 hours before we performed the work. On February 2nd, I reviewed the building management system's maintenance history for the basement levels. The system showed regular inspections dating back years, all logged under my credentials, all documented with the same level of detail. I cross-referenced the inspection dates with my work calendar. Most matched scheduled inspections I'd performed, but several entries documented inspections on dates when I'd been on vacation, out sick, or assigned to other tasks. I isolated one entry, a comprehensive infrastructure audit on November 12, 2023. According to my calendar, I'd been attending a facilities management conference in Chicago on November 12th. I hadn't been at the hospital, but the building management system showed a detailed audit logged under my credentials, complete with observations and photographs. I reviewed the photographs from the November 12th audit. They showed accurate conditions for that date, equipment that had since been relocated, signage that had since been updated, spaces that had since been reconfigured. The audit had been performed while I was 800 miles away. On February 3rd, I submitted a formal incident report to the hospital administration. I documented the overnight inspection, the access logs under my credentials, the camera footage showing a figure matching my movement patterns, and the historical maintenance entries logged during my documented absences. I recommended a comprehensive security audit and an investigation into the building management system's credential handling. The hospital administration responded on February 5th. They acknowledged the report and confirmed that a security audit had been initiated. They noted that the baseline inspection report was accurate and usable for the renovation project. They suggested that the overnight inspection might have been performed by a staff member with temporary access to my credentials, though no evidence of credential sharing or cloning had been found. On February 6th, I reviewed archive security footage dating back to 2023. I searched for other instances of the figure appearing in the basement during overnight hours. The footage showed regular appearances, the figure moving through the basement levels, performing inspections, documenting conditions, following procedures with professional precision. The appearances occurred on a schedule that aligned with routine maintenance cycles. Weekly walkthroughs, monthly inspections, quarterly audits. I compared the figure's activities to my own work schedule. The figure appeared during hours when I was off duty, on vacation, or assigned elsewhere. The figure performed the work I would have performed following the procedures I'd established, using the methods I'd developed over 19 years. On February 7th, I installed a secondary camera in the basement level 2 mechanical room, a space I inspected frequently. The camera was independent, battery-powered, recording locally without connecting to the hospital's network. If the figure appeared during my absence, the secondary camera would capture it independently. On February 9th, I reviewed my work schedule. I was scheduled to be off duty from February 10th through February 12th, a long weekend. I did not schedule any inspections during my absence. On February 13th, I returned to the hospital and checked the building management system. The system showed a routine mechanical inspection performed on February 11th at 0300 hours. The inspection was logged under my credentials. The report documented the basement level 2 mechanical room in detail, noting equipment status, temperature readings, and maintenance needs. I reviewed the hospital's primary camera feed for the mechanical room. At 0300 hours on February 11th, the figure entered the room, inspected the equipment, and documented observations on a tablet. The figure spent 14 minutes in the room, then exited. I retrieved the secondary camera and reviewed its footage. At 0300 hours on February 11th, the room was empty. The equipment sat idle. No one entered, no one inspected. The room remained undisturbed for the entire overnight period. I reviewed both feeds frame by frame. The hospital's camera showed the figure inspecting the room at 0314 hours. The secondary camera showed an empty room at 0314 hours. The timestamps matched. The footage was simultaneous. One camera recorded presence. The other recorded absence. On February 14th, I submitted a supplemental report documenting the dual camera test. I included screenshots from both feeds and recommended decommissioning the building management system's automated logging features for basement-level inspections. The hospital administration responded on February 16th. They acknowledged the report and confirmed that the building management system would be reviewed during the next scheduled software update. They noted that the inspection reports remained accurate and useful for operational purposes. On February 17th, I stopped trying to resolve the anomaly. The system documents inspections performed on a schedule I established years ago, following procedures I developed using credentials it recognizes as mine. The work is completed whether I perform it or not. The reports are filed accurately, the observations are thorough, and the infrastructure is maintained according to standards I set when I first took this role. I no longer question the logs. I review them, verify their accuracy, and sign off on the work documented under my name. The basement levels are inspected regularly, maintained systematically, and prepared for whatever changes the hospital requires. And somewhere in the overnight hours, a figure walks through the spaces I'm responsible for, performing the work I would do, following the routines I've repeated for 19 years, ensuring that the systems continue operating long after I've gone home. Some responsibilities persist beyond the people who establish them, carried forward by infrastructure that remembers the standards and replicates them with absolute procedural fidelity.